One, you're live.
Hello and welcome to the Good Old Days, our story about the show about the history of Rainham. I'm Pat Riley and our host is Don McKinnon, and our special guest today is Joe Bettencourt. So welcome. Don, we've been doing a few
A
of these
legend
shows
in his own
now.
lifetime, so.
And this is, we just mentioned, the first time we've had a repeat guest because we had so much to talk about with Mr. Bettencourt. We couldn't get it all into one program. But as we mentioned previously, the annual town report was dedicated to you at one point for all of your various volunteer efforts in the town of Rainham, from the rent control board to the school committee and being sort of the overseer of the number of building projects in
That was really selective service. It wasn't volunteerism.
Oh,
I got drafted. I used to have a friend who was on the selectmen, and he drafted me.
I have
He's
no
no
chance.
longer. He is no longer
I have no chance.
on the board of selectmen.
But I put them on boards that never die.
Oh, they go on forever.
There's no number of years appointment to the
Oh, it
building.
is. It's every 3 years.
So you
building
were
committee, not to the building.
Yes,
to
it
the,
is.
To the rent control.
Yeah, I get reappointed to the building committee
No,
today
I thought
for
that was-
3
I
years.
thought that was a lifetime membership.
See
Yeah,
that?
they
it's
didn't
sort of
Well, it
listen to
is.
you.
involuntary, voluntary service.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay, very good. Of all of those, what stands out in your mind as being most meaningful?
Yeah, before you discussed the meeting with T.L. Edwards on the mountaintop with a handshake to get this land, that was before. Now, what's the next one? You remember you told that story? Maybe you said you'd never forget as long as you live. You remember that?
Which story is that? Do you want me to talk about?
No,
Donald?
the other one. There's got to be. Pat's asking you what's your number one.
Well, you know, the survival of the strike when I was on the school committee.
Oh, that was tough.
That was a very difficult time.
Yeah.
It was totally unnecessary. People deny certain things and they accuse you of certain things, but the bottom line is that they called a strike, and I could understand that. The problem was that on excuse me, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, which was traditionally a half day,
Of school, right?
and they had a meeting, and they voted to strike.
This would be the teachers' union.
Teachers Union. I was in the office with the superintendent of schools, and the phone rang. It was from Channel 6 News. Do you have any comments about your strike? And we said, what strike? Well, your teachers have voted to strike. We haven't heard yet. So no comment at this moment, and he hung up, and then the phone rang, and we were talking to someone on the teachers negotiating committee, and they said, the teachers have voted to strike. And as they were saying that to the superintendent, I'm looking outside as the buses are pulling into the schools over to La Liberty and Merrill. And we have to unload the kids. So we proceeded to get the building principals, the secretaries, called all the school committee people, got them into the buildings, put all the kids in the auditorium, in the gym, and we just kind of babysat for the day.
So this was the beginning of the school day.
This was the beginning of the school day when they were offloading the buses. Could not turn the buses around and take the kids home. Parents didn't know that the kids weren't coming home. They knew they'd be home at noontime. And we struggled through it. And of course, you knew that my wife was a teacher in the staff. So that put me in a difficult position because I have to recuse myself on certain things. But I was there, and I was very disappointed with the teachers because behind the scenes, I had been talking to members of the negotiating team of what the school committee and the town would be able to do to help close the gap between the discrepancy between the K-8 Bridgewater salaries and the K-8 Rainham salaries. And We had proposed it, we put it on the table, they walked away. And that kind of got my dander up. And I says, they're going to have to pay for what they did. Because it was it could have been done any other time. They didn't have to wait till then. And the week after Thanksgiving, there was no school. They were out 5 days. Well, we fortunately prevailed. And we were the very first case that a judge awarded damages to a school committee for a teacher's strike. The very first case in the state of Massachusetts. I know because my wife had to write a check for her share of the bill.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that, Dawn, did you?
I smiled very happily because it
Limited
came out of her
Recall.
money. They finally came back to the table. This is history. It's factual history. They finally came back to the table and they signed the contract we had offered them 8 days earlier that they walked away from. No changes in the contract. They got nothing more except a request, and this is going to burn some people and they're going to complain about it because they say your memory's not that good, but I remember very well. They came back and said, look, can you help us out in any way that we can kind of save face? And we did. And it cost them more money. Because in order for them to save face, the third year of their contract, they had a stepped raise, September and in January. And they agreed to that. And that netted them less money in the paycheck. Now, I couldn't sit at the negotiating committee because my wife was on the unit. But Joe Emerson, the lawyer, kept telling me I can't be there. And I reminded him I was elected by the people in the town of Rainham to the school committee. And for some strange reason, the people on the school committee elected me chairman. And as intelligent as you are, Joseph, you work for us. So you're working for me. I'm here until we get to the point where you say, I'm going to be in dangerous waters. Then I will leave. I said, I don't want secondhand information because I can feed back information. And we prevailed. And when we finally, they finally settled it, and they said, yes, they're coming back to work, and they got the bill that they had to pay the expenses of the school department for 1 day. The first time in the state of Massachusetts that a teachers' union had to pay damages.
Really? Now, what year was that, Joe?
87.
Okay. And you were first elected, or you were first appointed? You
I was
weren't
appointed
elected.
in 82. There was a gentleman by the name of Kevin Flynn who resigned from the school committee to seek a job. And at the time, there was another gentleman who was interested in the school committee. And the two of us were interviewed. The electing body were the 3 selectmen and the 4 remaining school committee
members.
people.
That was the K to 8.
Yes, and then the first time we went through, it was 3 to 3. And the chairman of the school committee at the time needed to have more information. So we had another public session, and we got interviewed, and then they took a vote, and it was 4 to 3. And a member of the Board of Selectmen said, I'd like to reconsider the vote to make it unanimous, which they did. It's kind of like, you know, let's make them feel comfortable. Even though I voted against you, you know, welcome aboard type of routine. That was in August of 82. And a month later, Joe Law Liberty retired. He had already mentioned about retiring, and Bill Sullivan became the superintendent. And then I stayed on until 93. I chose not to run for re-election. The town wasn't, at that point, willing to spend the money necessary to maintain the school system. We had lost art, we lost music, we lost some phys ed. Everything was cut back.
That
There were no
1981 Proposition 2.5.
Well, 2.5 was before I got on the board. But up until that point in time, the school committee, we needed another $125,000, and I'd go to the town meeting and make a plea to the electorate, and the finance committee would say, we can't afford it, and the electorate would give us $125,000 because it was for education. But we reached a point where there was nothing left, and it required to do an override. And the community wasn't interested in doing an override at that particular point in time. Now, in those days, before ed reform passed, the school committee had considerable more power.
Fiscal autonomy.
And they had responsibility. You handed a bill to the selectmen and the finance committee for a dollar amount, and they basically had to say yes. They had no choice. They didn't vote line by line. They voted in total. Today, basically, all the power goes to the superintendent of schools. The selectmen's biggest job is to hire a superintendent of schools. They can have input, I'm sure. You're on the school committee. You have input into the budget. But it's not the same. You're fighting a different battle. And Reform Ed, it brought a lot of positive things to the table, but it also kind of pushed the school committee to the back. You set up policy, and because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and everybody wants something, and nobody's ever really happy. But
And like you said, you're limited with the power that you have at this point compared to what you was before.
yes. And the other bad day at Black Rock was we got sued by a teacher for her job. And we went through a turmoil because there were a group of parents who jumped to her defense, and were getting nasty calls and called different names, and you get thick skin and you just let it ride. But we were forced to put her back on the payroll. We appealed the case, and the appellate court was going to hear it, but for some strange reason, I'll never know why, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts said, no, we'll hear the case. So they heard the case, and their ruling was to go back to Superior Court and told the judge, you were wrong. And the teacher was gone. Disrupted the school system completely. There were a number of things, that, behind the scenes, but, she had a legitimate legal claim against another school system. But she opted to want to come back here, and then she put the pressure on, and got all the parents behind her, and they thought she's the best thing since sliced bread, but the bread had mold on it, and you had to handle it accordingly. But they were interesting times.
I guess.
Was that, Joe, and I don't want to get into the privacy of it, but didn't that teacher take another position and
Yes.
then after a few days change her mind and then decided to come back when the replacement had been hired, as I recall?
Yes. The history is...
I'm on the outside, but...
The history is she came to the superintendent of schools and said she wanted to resign from the Rainham school system.
That's right.
She was going to take a job.
Yes.
Now, she had to be locked in for like 30 days before she could leave. She had to give us 30 days notice. Or it could be waived by the superintendent if he could accommodate the need by getting somebody to replace her and accommodate the teacher, which he did. She took a job in a neighboring community, and they put her in a classroom that was opposite of what they said she was going to do. She didn't like the situation. She was there, as Dawn said, 2 days. She left and she came back and she demanded her back. She says because the 30 days hadn't expired, and I've been wrongfully displaced. Well, I was trying to read the contract and try to get an understanding. We had a hearing, a school committee member, and Joe Emerson was there with us, and someone made a motion to accept the superintendent's action. And I'm reading the note, and I lean over to Joe. I says, I don't think we really have to do anything. That was within his powers. Well, why are we? But they pursued it, and Joe made no, argument against it, and they confirmed. And then she went to court, and then the court came after us. And we had to disrupt the class by throwing the teacher out that we had hired to replace her. And she came back in mid-year, and she disrupted the class there. We appealed it. I got some nasty public comments made at a school committee meeting, because we weren't taped then.
Oh.
We weren't on that, and I was challenged, and I stood up at the table and I pointed at the person. I says, "Come on, want to do it now? You think you're going to be able to get to me? You're just in a different planet." And he made some nasty comments, and I said, I didn't want to refer, because I had a few that I got thrown back at him. I just told him, I said, you got to remember who you're dealing with, sir. I'm half Portuguese and I'm half Lebanese. Now the Portuguese, everybody say the Portuguese, they got nothing up here, and they bang their head in concrete. And then you got the Lebanese, who had the cedars of Lebanon, that was the naval fleet of the Mediterranean, would bend but never break. So how are you going to win? And he stuttered and stammered, and he sat down. But it was time for the goal in '93. Excuse me.
So you had some colorful times for sure.
Yes, we did.
Strikes are like divorce. They are the most serious thing that can happen. And people sometimes don't think corporations are people, but they are. And in the school world, as is the police, the fire, municipal world, you cannot strike. You can't.
It's against the law.
So therefore, if you do it, now you're not only striking, which is the divorce, but you're also, as Joe said, you're breaking the law. So it's a very risky. I remember one of the saddest moments is Shoshana Gashek was.
Yes, I was going to say that.
She was over in some other town in the Great Books, was it, Joe? Did they call it?
Yeah.
And they picketed it, and you'd say, have some class. You know? No, we love you, but have some class. Don't do this to this wonderful lady who's dedicating her life to education. She's doing this for years for zero. And here she is. She has the great books, which she's an academic extraordinary. Yes. And you're embarrassing her. There was never any need for that. But see, that's what happens in divorces. And that's what happens in strikes. People do things that they normally would never do.
They had Channel 6 with picketers at Shasha's house on North Main Street.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That was so
And
bad.
it was a bad case. And of course, she was on the negotiating team. And as chairman, they never came to my house. But if they had, I had a fixed comment form that the street out here is a private road. You're allowed to picket on the public street, so you have to go up to the corner on King Street, and I'll bring you coffee, but you can't picket out in front of my house. They never came to my house, but they picked on her. The woman who has 21 years on the school committee in the town of Rainham will forever be in her debt, just with Rave, what she did for Rave, and what she instilled in people to volunteer to help the children. I mean, it goes on. It was totally unnecessary for them to do that. They had opportunities, other opportunities. They could have got on the phone.
But it was over in 2 days, Joe. I didn't realize it was that, because of the long holiday, it was over in 2 days.
Well, no, it wasn't.
Because of
It was the whole
Thanksgiving?
week.
Yeah, but
The
I'm
week
saying.
after Thanksgiving.
But working days, it was, because there
Half a
was no
day.
school
Half a day on Wednesday.
They
Wednesday.
were out the full week.
Out Thursday, out Friday.
Hmm.
Did not come back to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday of the following
Oh,
week.
wow, that's not 2 days.
They were out
Yeah.
7
Oh,
days,
oh, okay.
and they came back and signed the contract. We walked away from
How long had you been negotiating? How long were they
Months.
without it? Really?
months. I have a theory behind that, but you can never, you can't, put anything in stone on the theory. We had a superintendent by the name of Dr. E. Joseph La Liberty, loved by everybody. Was a father figure. Everybody agreed. Treated everybody nicely. Everybody was happy. They was content. Bill Sullivan became superintendent. And 5 years into his superintendency, he retires. Now again, that was a continuation. Everybody loved Bill Sullivan. We have a new superintendent that comes in, and they'll say, okay, other towns that it was on striking, and we have a new superintendent. Let's test her mettle. Let's see whether or not things are as good as they say. And they picked on a very tenacious tiger. Believe me.
That was
Eileen
Dr. Williams.
Yeah, she was absolutely dotted every I, crossed every T. She had every piece of paper that necessary. She logged everything. She and Joe Emerson did a fantastic job.
Was that Joe the elder?
Yes, the father. Nice guy.
Yeah, both
Nice
Joes.
guy. Yeah, but young Joe's great too.
Yeah, yeah.
But we were talking to the dad, and I congratulated him afterwards when we won the case with the state, with the penalty. Because I figured they need to know, if you make kids responsible for their actions, you have to be responsible for your actions too. So,
I think Joe and I concur on that to the degree that I've always said there are certain what I call town fathers of the new generation Rainham, which would be from, say, 1950, that half century. And E. Joseph was the town father in education. He
Yeah.
was the person who forged education in the town of Rainham. When you moved to Rainham, you thought of education because of E. Joseph La Liberty. As a matter of fact, when Ed Reform or 2.5, when any of those different things came in, Joe already implemented much of these. If anything, it was
Yes.
holding him back
he was
because
progressive.
he was so forward-thinking. Billy Sullivan, just everybody loved, and poor Eileen Williams was like third man in and a two-man whatever. And she walked in, I think she went to Duxbury afterwards and
Yes, she
stayed down there
retired from
until she
Duxbury.
retired from there.
Yeah.
She worked with young Joan Lind, Jack Lind's daughter,
Yeah.
was her like assistant down there for many years.
But had quite a team too when you had Dr. Williams and Dr. Joseph Gilbert as the assistant superintendent. There was a lot of brain power there between the two of them. They could have both, you had like a double superintendency.
Well,
Yeah.
they could have been, and Joe Gilbert, if it wasn't for Joe Gilbert, the merger between Rainham and Bridgewater would never have taken place. And, he should be given the credit for that. He should have been superintendent of schools, but unfortunately, as it was, we had a superintendent in the region, and you weren't going to fire him just because now we're K through 12. And no problem with OD. I mean, he was the superintendent, so Joe stayed for a while, and then he went off down to Sandwich, down to Cape Harwich someplace, and he
Harwich,
became a superintendent. But Joe La Liberty brought in a guy like Chet Millette. He was principal at the elementary school, which is now the La Liberty. And a guy like Bill Bruno came in, and he was over at the Merrill. And they had great guys working, Kathleen Roberts, Dot Newton, principals of the small schools. They had a good team. They all worked on the same page, working for the same goal with the kids.
Right.
And education's changed so much today. And But those were tough times. It was hard to, you go down the street and some people would almost want to spit in your face because you were on the school committee because you were asking for more money or you didn't like this particular teacher. It didn't make a difference. I like one or the other, you know. Woke one up in class one day walking through the building, wanted to know whether or not this was a study hall. What do you mean? I said, you're sleeping at your desk with the kids sitting here. Fortunately, the superintendent was with me when I did that. So.
And yet, Dawn, for the last many years, the town's people have supported education without question almost, even passing an override.
It's always been a pro-education town. Mentioning the merging, of course, cuts into my time when I opposed it at the time. As a matter of fact, Jimmy Dupont, who just moved out this weekend to go to Florida, was chairman of that study committee, and I was on that study committee. And not to bring the whole thing back into play, but sometimes, it was agreed by the study committee that the three superintendents would have nothing to do with this because each one of them had something to gain and lose. So to be objective, they would have said nothing. And voila, like a miracle, the three superintendents suddenly became involved with about 2 months to go in the study. Prior to that time, they would have said nothing. And Joe, you mentioned Gilbert. He was a graduate of Boston College. He was the superintendent then at that time because Mrs. Williams saw this on the horizon and left the boat, which was her right to do. And I said to Gilbert at the time, after they voted positively on it, Joe, I don't know why you got involved in this because let me explain this to you. You should be superintendent. And yet the cards were dealt that you couldn't be superintendent, as Joe said, because the 9 to 12 superintendent was superintendent of Bridgewater Rainham, and as Joe said correctly, you can't dismiss him. He didn't do anything wrong. The only thing is there were three superintendents on the playing field that shouldn't have been on the playing field. And Gilbert was the prime person, with all due respect. The Bridgewater superintendent was very close to retirement, ready to go. We won't go into the other personalities, but I did say this to him. If you are here this time next year, as he was assistant superintendent, they let him keep his office. He was in now the expansion of the old Merrill School, and he had a beautiful office. They let him keep his office. They kept his pay. And I said, if you are here next year, then I will have been wrong about you, because you are too much of a talent to be the Tonto to the Lone Ranger. You are the Lone Ranger. And by the way, I won that bet. He left and went to another system and became, and
coincidentally,
history.
He
became as an advisor to
executive
us.
director of an educational collaborative that the school district then hired in our superintendent search to find our superintendent, Dr.
And there I
Forbes.
am opposite Joe again. I says, will you ever stay away?
Who made that call?
Who made what call?
The
About Joe
collaborative.
Gilbert.
Come back, you mean, Joe.
Come on now, Pat. You remember. You got a phone call at home from me. I says, if you're going to go out in a search committee, I suggest you call Joe Gilbert. He's got a crew that does this professionally.
Yeah, they were
Take it out of their hands.
Yeah.
And we did everything according to the law. We went out
Yes,
for
you
bid
did.
and so forth, and he
No,
came in
no
with the lowest
question.
bid.
No, see, Joe, when we bring you on board, you make people nervous, you see?
Don't bring me.
No, but speaking of that, we're going to maybe have to have you come back for a third show,
Oh,
Joe.
my goodness.
Oh, I don't know.
Have
I
we
did
burned
this-
up the half hour?
See
We only
that?
got 2 issues. I'm going to tell you something before we go. We still got a minute?
We got
How
a
much
minute.
of time
We got
we
a
got?
minute, 1 minute.
Just about done. There is a picture of Billy Sullivan in Rainham's town hall because of Joe, because he demanded that the man have recognition where they changed it. My recommendation to Madam Chairman is that there should be a picture of Joseph as you come into the auditorium at the middle school, which is dedicated already to Joe. And I don't care if the name, I know it's up above there, but nobody looks up. I would request of you that there be a picture of Joe,
All right, June, I
as
have to
there
get
is
your
for,
picture.
as there is for Sully, because I think that's wonderful.
Well, I did the same thing with Joe La Liberty. I mean, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I was on the school committee when we named the La Liberty after Joe, and they said, we don't do that if the people are alive. I said, well, they're not gonna know about it when they're dead.
Is it over? Are we
We
done?
are just
We got
about
it. Can you-
out of time, I think, correct? Looks like. So,
See, this is signals now. See, if I run third base, I would know whether to run home or not. Because first if you wave and then you gave us the decapitation.
means we got to end it up quickly. So, Joe Bettencourt, thank you for coming back for our second visit, and we'll invite you back again. Don McKinnon, we want to thank all of you for being with us as well, and we'll see you on our next episode of The Good Old Days.
That was the fastest half hour
Yes.
I think I've ever spent in my life. Because there are only really 2 issues we took up, so you're gonna have to come back, Joe.
I know.
I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
How can I have to come back? I mean.